Hi everyone, and thanks for coming to 10 Unconventional Tips for Cloud Architects. My name's Chris Buckley, and I've been designing AWS architectures for almost a decade. When I speak to architects, especially those who are just starting to work with cloud, I find there's often a misconception that once the design for a workload is complete, the architect's job is done. In reality, an architect's position of responsibility means you'll often be put in challenging situations you might not have had to handle before. Today, I'm going to share with you the tips that I use to help me handle these situations. So not only will you be better prepared for them, you'll also have learned how to design better architectures and earn the trust of your team and the broader business. Let's get started. So there are 5 key scenarios you'll encounter over the life cycle of a workload. First, we'll cover the architectural design phase, where architects spend most of their time. Next, we'll look at the operations review and see how architects can drive design improvements over time. At some point, you'll be asked to participate in a post-incident review. I'll tell you how architects can get involved and help the team. Finally, I'll cover cost discussions and meetings with executive stakeholders. These don't sound like they'd be the domain of the architect, but it's vital that you're able to earn the trust of your finance team and get executive buy-in for new initiatives. Let's start with the most common scenario you'll encounter as an architect: designing your architecture. Time for the first tip. Don't make any AWS account into a monolith. Many new cloud architects automatically assume they should put everything into a single AWS account. This will let them have one set of users or roles, one network, one console, and so on. While this approach might work at first, over time it results in a workload that gets complex to manage. The good news is that not only is it easy to separate out your workloads across as many AWS accounts as you need, it's actually an AWS best practice. Let's look at a few principles to guide your decisions when it comes to planning out your AWS accounts. Because it's so easy to get started with AWS, it can be very tempting to quickly create an account and just start building. However, account design is a step you should spend some time on to set yourself up for success. Firstly, decide how you'll map your workloads to your accounts. At a minimum, you should separate workloads by purpose and environment, as it keeps things easy to manage. Secondly, to get the maximum benefits from running this multi-account configuration, use AWS organizations to manage your accounts. As you can see on the right, you can arrange accounts in your organization using organizational units, or OUs. From there, you can begin setting controls and configuring services and resources across your organization centrally. A great way to get started quickly with AWS organizations that uses our best practices is AWS Control Tower. Control Tower sets up an AWS organization and a foundational set of accounts. It also provides automated account provisioning, applies guardrails for management and governance, and gives you a single pane of glass dashboard for visibility. It's really worth taking your time in this stage and figuring out what works for you to ensure your workload is simple to manage over its entire life cycle. Now we know how to avoid the pitfalls of the monolithic AWS account, let's move on to tip number 2. When working in the cloud, it's impossible to underestimate the importance of security. It underpins everything. To access an AWS account or to interact with any service or resource, you must have some kind of identity and a policy that defines what you can and can't do. Architects also need to think deeply about how to secure workloads and protect data. Unfortunately, I've seen some architects take a rushed approach to security. They design the minimum to get a workload operational and then put it on a list to revisit later. This isn't a great idea, as it can open the workload up to unnecessary risks. We can mitigate these risks by not rushing the security of a design, and remembering no one gets fired for improving security. There are 3 key principles for a strong security baseline. The first is to implement a strong identity foundation with Identity and Access Management, or IAM. The best way to do this is by firstly centralizing identity management, removing the need to find and disable or rotate credentials in multiple places, and giving your users a seamless single sign-on experience. Second, you need to consider permissions management. The 2 points to remember are firstly to never grant more permissions to an entity than it needs, as it's much better to set a policy that is initially too restrictive than expand it as necessary. And secondly, use AWS managed IAM policies where possible. These policies are authored by AWS and updated over time as new features and services are released, easing the operational burden of ongoing permissions management. Next, ensure you're considering security all the way from the AWS account layer to the network, instances, resources, middleware, all the way up to the application code. There are lots of AWS services that can help you implement security at all layers and maintain your compliance ongoing, such as AWS Firewall Manager and AWS WAF, which provide DDoS protection and edge security, AWS Security Hub and AWS Inspector, which perform security posture analysis and continuous compliance, Amazon Macie to help secure data in S3, and many more. Finally, ensure you're protecting data both in transit and at rest, and ensure your design factors in the different sensitivity levels for the data you're storing. For example, maybe you're storing some HTML code you're hosting publicly, and you're also storing some data that contains personally identifiable information of your users. These two types of data should be stored completely differently, with different access controls. How you store each type is ultimately up to you to decide, but you should factor it into your design and leverage mechanisms that AWS provides, such as encryption and fine-grained access control, to ensure your data stays secure. As you can see, building a strong security baseline takes time and consideration, but it's always going to be time well spent. Now it's on to unconventional tip number 3. When it comes to networking, a number of architects I've spoken to have admitted that once they've selected their IP ranges, ensured their subnets can accommodate future expansion, and determined how they'll connect from AWS back to their on-premises networks, they tick the networking item off their design task list as completed. However, as accounts and workloads grow over time, architects and their teams will be faced with the challenge of a growing network of resources with increasingly complex connectivity requirements. The key for success here is looking at how large and complex workloads are run and which AWS services are being used to help remove the undifferentiated heavy lifting of large-scale networking in the cloud. This will help you build your networks on solid foundations, the only way to ensure future success. Let's take a look at a few of the challenges that are faced by AWS customers and how they're solved. As customers build and grow their networks, they mainly solve for 3 major challenges. First, the time-consuming work of network setup and management. Second, privacy and security threats. And third, having limited insights into network issues. AWS Networking Foundations helps customers reduce network complexity, improve security posture, and upgrade their ability to monitor and manage their network, all while lowering costs. Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, or Amazon VPC, lets customers easily launch AWS resources in a logically isolated virtual network that they define. As a customer's networking of VPCs grows, AWS Transit Gateway connects VPCs and on-premises networks through a central hub, removing the need to manage multiple peering relationships. AWS Private Link furthers this security by providing private connectivity between the VPCs, AWS services, third-party SaaS applications, and the customer's on-premises networks, without exposing traffic to the public internet. So armed with these services and foreknowledge of the challenges customers face as their networks grow, you can ensure your future success by starting out leveraging these core networking services, growing your network from a solid foundation. Let's move on to tip number 4. With AWS's pace of innovation and breadth and depth of services, I know some cloud architects who sometimes feel drawn to the AWS services they know best when designing architectures. They rely on their muscle memory to help make choices. This does their customers a disservice. I prefer to think of AWS as an amazing set of building blocks that provides a huge number of ways to solve business problems. As an architect, it's your role to select the right services by evaluating all the choices available. This is very different to selecting the same service every time, even for workloads that might appear to be similar. But don't worry, I've got 4 ways to help you avoid muscle memory. Firstly, know what your options are. When designing a workload, don't rely on choices you've made previously. Every workload is different. This is especially important if you've not designed an AWS workload for some time. The speed of innovation may mean there are now new services that are even better suited than choices you've made in the past. Learn about and understand the wide range of services and resources available in the cloud in detail, and understand how to achieve optimal performance. Secondly, don't start from scratch every time. Build a library of architectural patterns and use resources like the AWS Architecture Center. It contains reference architectures, quick starts, and solutions implementations developed by AWS and APN partners for a wide variety of use cases that can accelerate your design. Next, if you need help, ask. AWS Solutions Architects and AWS Professional Services can provide guidance for solution implementation, and AWS APN partners can provide deep AWS expertise to help unlock agility and innovation for your business. Finally, take advantage of how easy it is to run experiments and test ideas in the cloud to prove out your designs. Remember to measure everything to ensure you can use your experiments to make good, evidence-based decisions. It's as easy as that. But what about when it actually comes to running your applications? Well, the next tip will help. Let's take a look. Every application is different. There are countless programming languages, libraries, and frameworks in use, and apps are developed and tested across an almost infinite set of environments. This means that every app has different needs, so one size doesn't fit all. Take your time to look at the available options, experiment with a range of compute types, and select the one that fits your app's profile the best. Remember also that your workload may contain multiple apps, and each of them may have a totally different profile. So go through this exercise for each component in your system. Let's take a look at one of AWS's most popular compute offerings and see how it can provide you with a best fit choice for every app. With Amazon EC2, customers have access to reliable, secure, resizable compute capacity with flexible consumption options to meet the demands of virtually any workload. Organizations today want to optimize performance and cost and tailor infrastructure to meet their workload and business needs. To do so, they need access to both the broadest and deepest portfolio of compute options that gives them the choice and flexibility to run their workloads on their terms. With a range of choices for processes, purchase, and consumption options, and where to run the workload. Amazon EC2 provides resizable compute capacity in the cloud and makes web-scale computing easier for customers. It's a foundational service for AWS and offers a wide variety of compute instances that are well suited to every imaginable use case, from static websites to supercomputing on demand, all available via highly flexible pricing options. As you can see, with the broadest and deepest portfolio of compute options, you'll find the right fit for each application that makes up your workload. And the ability to quickly experiment with different instance types means it's easy to find the compute option that works for your app. Selecting the right instance type will mean that your app has the resources it needs to run most effectively, whether you need an instance optimized for CPU, memory, or storage-intensive workloads, or even something else entirely, like a chip designed specifically to accelerate deep learning workloads like AWS Inferentia. With that, let's move on to unconventional tip number 6. The last unconventional tip we're going to cover for the design phase relates to a very important topic in technology: sustainability. As architects, an application's performance is one of our primary concerns. If our users have a poor experience, they'll be less likely to be a repeat customer. But if architects don't approach their designs with sustainability in mind, this could result in a poor experience for all of us. Remember, your workload should be great to use and kind to the planet. But how do you actually do this? Let's take a look. Firstly, running your workload on AWS is already helping you to design sustainably. A recent report by 451 Research found that running a workload on the cloud can reduce energy consumption and associated carbon emissions by up to 80%. You should also design for maximal utilization. This means your designs should ensure high utilization of your resources, maximizing the energy efficiency of the underlying hardware. You should also aim to eliminate or minimize idle resources, processing, and storage to reduce the total energy required to power your workload. Finally, ensure your design is flexible and can quickly and easily adopt new and more efficient services or features released by AWS and our partners. This enables a continuous reduction in impact over time. Keep these few rules in mind, and you'll ensure your architectures have sustainable roots. So the workload you've designed has been built and launched, and your team has moved into business as usual, or BAU mode. For architects, this is where the real work begins. Why? Because how your workload is architected can and should change over time. AWS's rapid pace of innovation means there are always exciting new services and features being released. Any of these might make your design more performant, cost-efficient, or resilient. A great way to drive the adoption of new services or to refine the design of a workload in BAU mode is in operations reviews with your team. Let's look at how you can implement this tip in 3 easy steps. This tip uses a concept I like to call the virtuous cycle of continuous design improvement. It's a cycle you'll repeat over the lifetime of each workload, and it improves your design with each iteration. Step 1 is to stay up to date on new resources and services. Personally, I like to check the What's New with AWS blog every morning over breakfast. Investigate new services and product offerings and how they might improve your design. Step 2 is to bring these proposed improvements to your team at the operations review. Use data to support your proposals by building proof of concepts or consulting with subject matter experts. Remember, one of the key benefits of AWS is the flexibility you have to test new ideas or technologies with minimal cost or risk. So don't be worried if your idea doesn't work out. What matters is that you tried. Finally, when your team agrees to implement the improvement, follow a predefined process to safely implement the change and improve the workload. These 3 steps are all you need to ensure your design keeps evolving over time and help you and your customers continue to realize the greatest benefits of the cloud. You can also use this virtuous cycle to integrate any change into your design, such as improving resiliency, optimizing costs, or increasing performance. As we all know, it's impossible to see into the future. At some point during the life cycle of your workload, the unexpected may happen. So preparation is key. Operational best practices dictate that you should do a post-incident review following any issue to dive deep and identify the root cause. These reviews also provide a great opportunity for architects to identify design improvements, which brings us to unconventional tip number 8. Expect and learn from the unexpected. The best way to prevent the unexpected is to limit the risk of failures caused by human error as much as you can. This means designing your workloads so that all changes can be made through automation. For example, by using infrastructure as code tools like AWS CloudFormation, properly managing your infrastructure as code by checking it into a source code repository, and using software development best practices like pull requests for changes. You should also encourage making small, easily reversible changes and only after they've been tested in your test environments. Secondly, when something does go wrong and you identify how your system failed, your future improvements should focus on identifying those failure states and responding to them automatically, creating a self-healing system. For example, if an instance ran out of memory and became unresponsive, design an improvement that monitors for that state and replaces the affected host. Feed the architectural improvements back into your design by leveraging the virtuous cycle of continuous design improvement we just talked about. This ensures your workload becomes more resilient over time and that any improvements are thoroughly tested before they're deployed. Finally, any improvements you identify that can make your architecture more resilient should be documented and shared across your business to foster a collaborative, communicative culture. In the cloud, cost optimization is a vital activity as it ensures you're able to realize one of the key benefits of AWS: only paying for what you use. Architects should be involved in all cost optimization activities, as their knowledge of AWS's services and each workload is indispensable. There are 4 core cost optimization concepts for AWS workloads, whether you're having a technical or a non-technical discussion. There's also one golden rule, which is also tip number 9. When it comes to cost optimization, optimal cost and lowest cost are not the same thing. Keep this in mind, and you'll be well on your way to becoming a cost optimization genius. The 4 core concepts for cost optimization are easy to remember. Firstly, and most importantly, make sure you know what your money is being spent on. Our cost management services like AWS Cost Explorer and AWS Cost and Usage Reports are the easiest way to get detailed cost data about your workload. You can then use this data to identify areas of highest spend, which are the first targets for cost optimization. When you're reviewing resources and services in your design, make cost-effective decisions. For example, prefer services that reduce your total cost of ownership, or TCO, such as AWS Managed Services. Remember, TCO includes the time spent by your team on operational activities. So if you can use a service that automates an activity like patching, that's time the team can spend on higher value activities, like adding new features. Next, match your supply of resources with the demands of your users. Leverage technologies like autoscaling to help automate optimal resource usage. Keep cost effectiveness in mind here as well. Don't provision so few resources that a spike in demand will impact the experience for your users. But don't over-provision unnecessarily and have unused capacity. There are some great tools to help you make these decisions, like AWS Compute Optimizer and AWS Trusted Advisor, which provide optimization recommendations driven by your workload's usage of AWS. Finally, remember that cost optimization is a journey. As you gather data over time about how your workload runs, you can better match supply with demand and identify new services and features that can reduce your TCO. Make time at least once a month for a cost optimization discussion, and integrate changes using the virtuous cycle of continuous design improvement. You, your team, and the finance department will all be happier as a result. As a cloud architect, you'll often find yourself needing to get executive buy-in for a new initiative. This might not be something you've ever had to do before, and it can seem pretty daunting. So how do you do this? You get buy-in by focusing on what matters to your stakeholders and talking about the business outcomes of your idea, not the technology you'll be using. It's less complicated than it might sound. Let's take a look. One of the core concerns every executive stakeholder has about any initiative is its cost as a proportion of the revenue that it brings in. A great way to address this concern is to use a concept called unit metrics to portray costs in an outcomes-focused business context. To do this, you first need to determine your units of demand. This can be something as simple as individual users of your workload, individual transactions, or even individual clicks. When you've determined an appropriate unit of demand, you can then divide your total AWS spend for the workload by the unit of demand to get the incremental unit cost. If you've heard the phrase cost per click before, this is what we're talking about. As a bonus, if you divide resource usage, like EC2 instance hours per month, by your unit of demand, you'll get the incremental unit consumption. This can help make engineering decisions that will result in a more efficient architecture. Let's see how you can then present this data to your executive stakeholders. Displayed over time like this, incremental unit cost helps show your executive stakeholders that even though resource consumption and cost might trend upwards as a platform grows, an initiative that drives down the unit cost maximizes the outcome that matters to the stakeholders. For example, the workload's profitability. As you can imagine, this is a lot easier to position with your stakeholders than simply talking about the benefits of a new technology. Whew! We've covered a lot in this session. Let's recap. When you're designing an architecture, don't make any AWS account a monolith. Remember, no one gets fired for improving security. Build your networks on solid foundations to ensure future success. Make the right choice. Avoid muscle memory when selecting AWS services. When it comes to compute, every app has different needs, so one size doesn't fit all. And finally, while your workload should be great to use, it should also be kind to the planet. Remember, the architect still has a role to play in other situations. Make time to attend operations reviews. How your workload is architected can and should change over time. Know that the unexpected will happen, so use what you learn to improve your workload. Remember, optimal cost and lowest cost aren't the same thing, and that cost optimization is a journey. Finally, when seeking stakeholder buy-in, know that they want to understand the business outcomes of your initiatives. With these tips in mind, you'll be able to handle almost any situation the exciting world of architecture throws at you. And whether you're a seasoned cloud architect or just getting started, these training resources offer something for everyone. AWS Skill Builder is our online learning center that makes it easy for anyone to build AWS cloud skills. As you build your skills, consider preparing for one of our 11 AWS certifications. These industry-recognized certifications span foundational, professional, and specialty levels to validate AWS knowledge and skills, building your credibility and your confidence. You can scan one or both of the QR codes on the screen to get started with your cloud skills training and certification. Thanks for watching. And finally, we really value your feedback to help us improve our sessions, so please share your rating in the session survey.